Hello and welcome to A Theory of Everything. I'm Luis Razo, the director of ASEM and host of this channel. Today I have a repeat guest, one of the most widely read syndicated columnists in the US, a friend and former college classmate, Ruben Navarrette. We agreed to talk about Larry Elder's bid for the governorship of California and about minority conservatives in general. Because this is the first of a series of conversations I hope to have with Ruben, I thought it would be a good idea to start with a personal position statement. This was especially important for me, given that many of my positions lend themselves to a complete misunderstanding of what motivates me as a person and as a thinker. We don't start talking about Larry Elder until the very end, but I think our position statements are a worthwhile foundation for this and any future conversations. You'll find a timestamp in the video description to hop around as you see fit. Thanks for your time, and as always, if you think I've got something all wrong, let me know and I'd be happy to have you on as a guest. I'm here with my college classmate, Ruben Navarrette, and today is the first of what I hope is a series of conversations that I'll have with Ruben. And in the interest of establishing a base for these conversations, I'm going to ask Ruben to do a couple of things. Ruben, if you would be nice enough to introduce yourself on the first hand, and then second, if you could transition into some kind of a position statement about yourself, how you see yourself, your politics, your identity, etc.
Yep.
And then I'll follow with a similar position statement on my end.
Great. Good to be back with you. Thank you. It's always nice to be with you. My background, very quickly, I'm a native of several things, right? I'm a native of Central California. I'm a Mexican-American living in the Southwest. I'm the oldest of three children. I'm the son of a retired cop. My dad was on the job as a law enforcement officer for 37 years. I'm the grandson of farm workers. All my grandparents were farm workers. Three of my four grandparents were from Texas, and one was from Mexico, from Chihuahua. And I am by profession a writer and columnist, and that has over the time and over years grown into other things where I communicate in different ways. I'm a public speaker. I give speeches around the country, and sometimes in other parts of the world. And then, I've written a book. I wrote a book when I was very young. I host radio shows. I host podcasts. I create a kind of digital storytelling with videos and the like. So the thread that really links it all together is I communicate for a living, and I am a professional storyteller. Sometimes that takes me into the realm of politics, as it does with the character we're going to talk about today, Larry Elder, and some of the things we cover, like Black conservatives.
Excellent. Ruben, you also write for the Washington Post writers group, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
For 20 syndicated columnist?
Yeah, for 20 years now. I've been with the Washington Post writers group for 20 years. And I write a nationally syndicated column. It goes out twice a week to a number of papers around the country. And I've written over 3,000 columns over the years. And they gravitate to a series of maybe categories, maybe 50 different categories, those 3,000 columns. And some popular categories include media, politics, immigration, education, leadership, politics. But I do write about all sorts of things, and I've been doing that for a while.
Okay. And you'd also judged the Pulitzer Prize a couple of years. Is that also the case?
4 years, yeah. I judged it for 4 years at Columbia University. I was invited to do that. I was very honored to do that. And for 2 years, I was judging editorials, which are these unsigned newspaper stories that appear on the editorial page of the voice of the newspaper. It is an opinion, but it's unsigned, and it's a collective establishment opinion. The other 2 years, I judged columns, and I judge columns and like the ones I write, and they in fact were all from all over the country. Some of the better columnists, I got a chance to read them and appreciate their work. That was more a little bit my wheelhouse as well. It's all opinion writing, That's what I do. Most people don't understand that with newspapers, it's not just sort of straight news that is absent opinion. There is an opinion section, and that's where I live.
Excellent. And you have not one, but two Harvard degrees. Can you elaborate on this?
I was an undergrad there with you. Very pleased to be there with you. We came in the same class. And after I graduated, I took 5 years instead of 4 because I took a year off and I went to Fresno. Well, actually, I went back home to Fresno, to Central California, where I'm from. And I enrolled at Fresno State. This was all a plan and by design. And I enrolled for a year at Fresno State. I took Chicano Latino Studies courses because I couldn't get those courses at Harvard. I could get all sorts of other courses at Harvard, but I couldn't get Latino Studies courses at Harvard. So I loaded up with that. I took 4 one semester and 4 the other semester. And that was all I did. And I lived at home with my mom and dad, and I went to Fresno State for a year, went back to Harvard and graduated. After that was over, I went immediately into work. I started to write my books soon thereafter. I taught at the college level, and I taught at the kindergarten through high school level as a substitute teacher. And then 10 years later, I went back to Harvard and I got a master's degree at the Kennedy School of Government. So.
Excellent, excellent. Well, if it's okay, I'd like to share my screen, and I have a slide which summarizes kind of a position statement. If you could walk us through your end of that position statement and how you see yourself, and then I will follow up with my end of the statement.
Right. Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm a Mexican American in the Southwest. Both those things are important because I don't see myself as fully American or fully Mexican. There are some Mexican Americans who consider themselves Mexican. I don't have that luxury because my wife is Mexican. My wife is from Guadalajara. She's a real live Mexican, and I'm a Mexican American. I was born on this side of the border, and there are very different ways in which we view the world. So I'm a Mexican American. I live back in the old days, I don't use this term, but back in the 60s, they would have called it Aslan, which is the 8 states of the Southwest that used to be part of Mexico that were seized by the United States in the 1840s through manifest destiny. And those 8 states, including California, that's where I live. I live in the Southwest. So my worldview is shaped by the fact that I live in the Southwest and not in the Midwest or not in the East. You know, if I lived and had been born in Boston, even as a Mexican American, my worldview would be different. The second thing is I'm a lapsed Catholic. I feel most comfortable in the Catholic Church, for sure. I don't want to be anything else. I don't want to be Protestant or Mormon or Jewish. I don't want to convert to anything else. But having said that, I'm really pissed off at the Catholic Church and have been for the last several years because of their sex abuse scandal and the way it was handled. And I cover crooked politicians for a living as a journalist. So I'm especially attuned to crooked people in any institution, including the Catholic Church. So I'm a Catholic in that I pray to God every night, but I don't go to church, at least not for the time being. I'm an anti-elitist. You and I have spoken about elitism before. I really think that elitism is like the worst ism of them all. It's worse than sexism or classism or ethnocentrism or racism. It's worse than that because it divides people on this whole other superficial level. And I think that you become an elitist not through having more money, but by thinking yourself better than everybody else. And so I'm really against that, and I've decided in the last 5, 6, 10 years that is a big problem and one of the things that drives me.
We'll have more time to talk about what you mean by elitism, but point taken, yes.
Yeah, and I always think about I think about things like if I'm at a dinner party and I want to seem more sophisticated, erudite, smarter than everybody else, I say, the other day I heard on NPR, I heard on National Public Radio, I was listening to the BBC, I was watching PBS, I was reading in the New Yorker, I was reading in The Economist. If I'm going out of my way, I say things like, when Luis and I were at Harvard together, I mean, if I'm doing something to set myself apart from the person next to me, that somehow I'm better, smarter than you, then I need to get that looked at, right? I need to get that looked at, because to my mind, that's terrible and that's not necessary. And I have no desire to be separated from, 30 million Mexican Americans who didn't go to Harvard. My aunts, my cousins, my brother and sister, my mom and my dad, my neighbors, my friends I went to school with. That's a really big price to pay, to cut myself off from all of those people. So that's where that anti-elitism stuff comes from. And you and I, we've done a whole show just on this before, and I'd love talking about that stuff with you. I just have that view, and that's where it's coming from. I'm a centrist. To go back to the list very quickly, I'm a centrist because I don't trust either political party. I don't think either political party has the answers. I think they're very much the same. I see them as like a two-headed snake, the Republicans and the Democrats. And I think that that the best answers are often in the middle, and that neither party has an exclusive on all the answers. So I'm a centrist. My podcast is called Ruben in the Center. And there are so many times, even away from politics, when I'm not talking about Republicans or Democrats at all, but I'm talking about some other issue, and I find myself in the center. Should we open our public schools in California? That's not a political issue, and it's not an issue of Republicans and Democrats. There are going to be those who say we should keep them all closed, and those who say we should keep them all open. And I think the answer is in the middle. So I'm a centrist. Also, I'm a father, son, husband, and friend. I'm a father because my three kids, my 12, 14, and 16-year-old, are just the most important thing to me. And fatherhood is very challenging. Parenthood is very hard. I make a lot of mistakes at it. But I really do feel like it's my most important role. I'm a son because my mom and dad are now up in age, up near 80 years old. And you can appreciate this as well. I'm sandwiched in between my kids and my parents. And as my parents get older, and they begin a cognitive decline, it's become challenging to be there for them as much as I want to be there for them. So there's that. And then I'm a husband, as I said before. My wife is from Guadalajara. She's my better 7/8, not just my better half, but my better 7/8. You're lucky you get an eighth out of me. She is very smart and very bright, and a very good person. Probably the best person I know. Very quickly, I'll say that she's doing a second master's program, this one in speech pathology, to become a speech therapist. She's already a language therapist who works with kids who have dyslexia. She was born in Guadalajara and speaks and writes both English and Spanish fluently, right? So, and then I try to be a good friend. Now that's challenging because some of my closest friendships, I consider you a friend. I think that I have a very small group of people, and it gets smaller all the time. Some very special people I grew up with, people I went to kindergarten with, people I've known all my life, right? From my childhood, those are special friends. During the pandemic, I reached out to some of them and we tried to connect. And I feel like I was separated. I mean, this is a personal thing. I don't think I've ever told you this before, but I feel like when I was in elementary school and I was sitting with all the other Mexican kids, I was somehow separated off and put over with the white and Asian kids through tracking and what goes on in public schools and the like, and my own, abilities. And before I knew it, I was off and running, baby. And I was a senior in high school taking 5 AP courses and getting all A's and A pluses and going to Harvard and all this. And way back when, I left behind these Mexican friends of mine from kindergarten. And now when I reach out to them, I see that gap that exists and I feel guilty for it. I feel a sense of loss. The only thing I can compare it to is, and I don't want to make this overly dramatic, but at the border, where you talk about families being separated at the border, I feel there was an amount of separation from me and those friends, and I was taken from them, and them from me, and we went on and lived different lives. Lastly, and some of those friends, by the way, brothers, some of those friends, they went off to the military. Some went into blue collar jobs. Some got into drug abuse. Some went to jail. Some went to prison. Some died. It's all those things that I know you can relate to firsthand, of the kids that we grew up with, who had different lives than the ones that we've had. Lastly, I'm a writer and communicator, as I said. Primarily, my love is writing. I've been doing it all for a long, long time, 30 years. But I communicate now in all sorts of ways through video, podcasts, speeches, And you know what I've learned? There's so many opportunities out there in that space. There's an endless amount of opportunities. The opportunities are not always obvious, but they are very much endless. And if you keep an open mind, you're never going to run out of stuff. I'm never going to run out of work. I'm never going to run out of stories to tell. So many great stories out there. That's it.
Excellent, Ruben. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. For those who might be waiting, our conversation topic, our main conversation topic for this first exchange will be Larry Elder and the Black conservative movement in the context of the California recall for governor. The reason we're going through this kind of position statement is basically to lay the groundwork, if nothing else, between ourselves about what we really believe and how we see ourselves. How other people see us might be a different story, but I thought this would be a good place to begin in terms of how we see ourselves. And Ruben has just explained how he sees himself. I'd like to now spend a couple of minutes to tell you all how I see myself, how I identify myself, and then we'll continue on with Larry Elder. So the primary or the first word on the list here is Catholic. So for me, the Catholic faith is first and foremost, I identify as a Catholic, and that's from a spiritual and intellectual conviction, strong on both ends. I'm a practicing Catholic. I believe that what the Catholic Church teaches is infallible. I think it's important to make a distinction between what the Catholic Church teaches and what the Catholic Church does. It's very different. So I draw a lot of inspiration from intellectually and spiritually. Intellectually from the great Catholic tradition, both in philosophy and theology, and as well as in science. And we can talk about that at some point in the future. And spiritually as well, from the lives of the saints. I spent many years really delving into the mystical theology of St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila. In fact, a big part of the reason that I live in Spain today is because of their writings. And I was drawn enough to them. So that situation in my life that came about that I came to Spain to visit was the intention. But I ended up meeting a girl and falling in love accidentally, and we ended up getting married, and now we have a family. But what originally drew me here was a wish to draw closer to that Spanish Catholic intellectual, cultural, and spiritual tradition. So this first word Catholic on top of the list is fundamental to my identity. And it's fundamental to everything I believe and most everything I say, from my view on politics, from my view on Black conservative movement, from my view about the United States, the difference between the Spanish vision of reality or the Spanish vision of nature and politics and society, and the Anglo vision of politics, society, science, etc. I think these two visions are, it's not appreciated enough how different they are and how radically opposed they are. Often people in the US think of white people as all of Europe, but I can attest to, on an intellectual level and on a cultural level, and now that I live here, that there's enormous differences between Northern Europe and Southern Europe. And at some point in the future, we can go into those. And I'm sure we certainly will. So the second set of words on the list is science, reason, and experiment. I think these are really, really important for me. In fact, they're not separated from my Catholicism. I see them as completely unified. Science, faith, and reason, I don't see them as in conflict at all. Once again, this is how I view it. We can talk about it in the future. I am Mexican American. I grew up in the US. I was educated in the US, Catholic schools, went on and got lucky and got into Harvard almost by accident. So I'm very much culturally American, but as a result of a lot of thinking and researching that I've done as an adult, I am a lot more identified today on the Mexican side of the equation than on the American side. And it's primarily, again, culturally, I'm American. There's no There's no escaping that. I can't deny that. My family and friends are all there. But intellectually, spiritually, I'm definitely on the Mexican side of the equation. And I think on your end, you identify more with the American side, and this is something we can talk about in the future. In terms of a lot of the predicament that we're in as a species, I say species advisedly because I think it's more than an American or Mexican problem. We're really in a predicament as a species, and I think it boils down to leadership and management. So I think I have an enormous passion for this discipline. In fact, I wrote my doctoral thesis on the physical and mathematical foundations of effective management. And so this is going to be this plays a big role in my thinking in general. The main point being that all of our problems, I think, are, if we had to summarize them, they would be problems of leadership. We just don't have the right kind of leadership, and that the leadership that we do have is based on erroneous conceptions of management. And by management, I mean management in the broadest sense, including not only companies, but governments as well, and management even of our own persons, of our own being. So it starts from even at the ontological or the philosophical level of being, down through government and organizations. I think that how we manage existence is so critical. And again, this ties into the previous statements about my Catholicism and my spiritual and intellectual convictions there. So I think the fundamental thing, or the main concept that drives all of my work and all of my thinking, and the reason that I've launched this channel and the reason that I'm engaging in these conversations with you, is because I'm concerned about long-term human survival. I think we live on a planet that's chock full of nuclear weapons, and this just makes absolutely no sense. It's like having a couple of small children in a house where all of the electrical outlets are live and they can get electrocuted at any moment. It's just ridiculous. Not only the nuclear threat, but there's any number of additional threats, maybe not as serious as the threat of nuclear war, but still very serious. I think that we're at the point of starting to genetically engineer ourselves, and yet we don't know what we're doing. There's the climate crisis, there's the increasing polarization. All of these things in conjunction put us at a risk that I think needs to be addressed. And I'm not alone here. There's a growing number of world-class institutions associated with the top universities that are also concerned with the same thing, and I align myself with those goals. I'm going to ask people to get prepared for a lot of extraordinary claims. I make a lot of extraordinary claims. One of them, the first one you'll hear today, perhaps, is the idea that, in contrast to any other organization that I'm aware of studying the problem of potential human extinction, I actually have a concrete proposal for how to address that. And that's another one of the main reasons that I launched the channel. And the last concept here is related to everything I've said previously, and it clashes completely with everything that we've been led to believe, in my opinion, from a series of errors that were made beginning 500 years or so ago in Northern Europe about the concept of equality. I think human inequality is much more important than human equality. Humans are definitely equal in dignity, or equal protection under the law. All these things are important, but I think it's really important to understand that the inequality is the only way we will arrive to a point where we can really honor the dignity of every single human without exception. And I think the best way to summarize this is to point out the difference between somebody like Mother Teresa and somebody like Adolf Hitler. These people are not equal. So there's an inequality there that I think is really, really important for us to keep in mind as we progress through some of these very complex and controversial topics. So thanks for listening to this. I appreciate it, for letting me kind of hash things out in terms of where I see myself and where I position myself. With your permission, Ruben, what we'll do now is transition into our conversation about Larry Elder and Black conservatives. In the process, maybe we should do two things. One thing, I'd like to contextualize the conversation historically, and if you'd like, in any other way you think is right, and also why it's significant that you and I are having this conversation. Why is it significant? I'll start with this question.
Sure.
I think it's significant for a number of reasons, some of which I've just laid out, but also because to many people in the US today and also in Europe, where I live and work, you and I are, for lack of a more graceful term, affirmative action babies. We were raised in a time when, because of the civil rights movement, it was felt that minorities, especially Blacks and Latinos, needed a helping hand to get into some of the top universities. We got in there at the height of this movement. So I think we have an obligation, because whether one agrees with that position or not, the fact is that you and I did take somebody's position at Harvard, which is a limited position, which brings with it a series of responsibilities. And I think we have an obligation to respond to those objections and to demonstrate, if we can, why they're wrong and what we can do about it. I think
Okay.
You may or may not agree with that. So
Let's start there.
I'll give you the floor, Ruben.
Okay, let's start there. First of all, the first thing I need to tell you is that I do disagree that you and I are affirmative action babies. You and I got into Harvard the old-fashioned way. We earned it. And we know this because if we take a look at who you were when you were 18 years old, and I'll just tell people how impressed I am with you now and I was with you then. You look at who you were at 18 years old, you'd gone to a private school, you'd done well, you'd taken top courses, you gotten all A's, you went and played football. You were one of the top 1% of Latino kids in the country. You weren't like anybody else. You worked harder, you were smarter. I, likewise, coming out of Fresno, I had 96 A's on my high school transcript. I had taken 10 AP courses throughout my time there. I had no B's. I had 22 A pluses. You and I both had good SAT scores, definitely within the range of the Harvard, SAT range. And we had all the other goodies. We did well in the interview. Everything Harvard said we needed to do, we did. And the old joke goes that, Ginger Rogers had it harder. She had to do everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in heels. Okay? Think about that. As a woman, backwards and in heels, right? And you and I had to do everything that our white counterparts did, but backwards and in heels. Because we were Mexican, we had to max out on everything that was done and put everything to us and get the same A+ in calculus that the white kid did, but it was still going to be harder for us. And to put the cherry on the sundae, when we got in, it was my experience, and I wrote about this in my book, which I wrote, from a major publisher when I was 24 years old. Not a lot of white kids did that where I came from. But in any case, that book says that when I got in, they said, well, if you hadn't been Mexican, you wouldn't have gotten in. The funny thing is, those same people who were saying that had grades that were not as good as mine. So if they say about Luis and Ruben, well, they only got into Harvard because they were Mexican, and we had better grades, took harder courses, worked harder, did better than they did, that just doesn't make sense. It's not fair. It's not logical, right? And so I don't give any ground. I say, well, I got into Harvard because they have affirmative action for class valedictorians. And Luis got into Harvard because of everything he had done. So I refuse to give ground to either conservatives or the liberals who say somehow that when I graduated, I should have said, I would like to thank God, my parents, and affirmative action, because I don't believe that. And I think at some point in time, you and I and all other people like us have to get off our bended knee, okay? Stand up and say, look, I don't owe you shit, okay? I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you to thank you to Ted Kennedy or to the Democratic Party or to the president of Harvard or affirmative action or like forget it. We're not doing that, because on the merits, number to number, we went up against you and we kicked your ass. So that's where I think we and I have a disagreement about the term affirmative action baby.
Well, no. I mean, to some people, I think my position is that
those people are stupid. Those people are stupid. Those people, I deal with smart, stupid people all the time, right? I cover politics for a living. Just because somebody sees us that way, and I don't care whether they're a liberal Democrat or they're a conservative Republican, if they think somehow that you and I are, quote, affirmative action babies, but they don't say anything about our roommates who were at Harvard with us, who got into the process just like we did, and they did not as well as we did once we got there, it doesn't make sense. Exactly at what point in time do I get to stand up on my own and say I earned it? I'm saying it today, right here, you and me. You know, you listen to you do these shows. I've seen your shows. I've known you for a long time. You are one fucking smart guy, okay? And so am I. And so enough apologizing.
Well, yeah, I think I see your point, and I've been I don't know if I should say I've been lucky enough or not, but I've never had anybody question me directly about my intelligence or about affirmative action, but I've read enough to know that it's a concern of some people. I'm also familiar with the literature. As you know from past conversations, I studied under Richard Herrnstein at Harvard, who wrote the famous bell curve, and he had a very formative impact on my intellectual development. And so I'm familiar with the literature, independent of your merits or my merits. I will say this to correct one impression that you have of my merits. Prior to getting into Harvard, I will say that from my case, I didn't deserve it. I certainly never studied. I never read a book. Yes, I played football. Yes, I went to a Catholic private school. I was in the advanced classes, but I never made much of an effort. In fact, I never read a book before I got to college. In fact, the first couple of years, I didn't even read a book. I always saw myself as exceptionally intelligent in terms of competition, but I noticed that most of the kids around me, even starting from grammar school and high school, everybody had personal tutors, or almost everybody had personal tutors. And it was I suppose, with some sense of satisfaction, I always felt that I didn't need the tutors.
Right.
And I suppose that's a reflection of some kind of intelligence. In any case, I think my point is that I've never had anybody directly tell me, you're not smart, or you got into Harvard because of affirmative action or anything like that. At the same time, I will say that objectively speaking, Blacks and Latinos do not compare on the standardized tests of either any kind of intelligence test, either the ACT or the SAT, or even something as neutral as repeating numbers in reverse order. I mean, we just don't compete with Asians, and even less with Jews. So there's a hierarchy of sorts when it comes to mental ability and measuring mental ability. And this is not controversial among the experts. This is standard, well-accepted empirical data that Jews are among the highest scoring group of people on the planet in terms of intellectual capacity, followed by the Asians, especially certain groups of Asians, then the European whites, and then Latinos, or Latinos of indigenous origin or mixed origin, and then blacks. Again, this is not controversial to the experts. This is controversial in the public opinion, in the public poll. But here I return to this mistake that I think was an Anglo mistake, an Anglo-Northern European mistake about equality, the idea that everybody is equal. And it's just a mistake. We're not equal. We don't compare as a group. There's no doubt that you are an exceptionally intelligent person, Ruben, no doubt about that. But if we pit you and I and 1,000 other Mexicans or Mexican Americans or Latinos against Asians, 1,000 Asians, the Asians would leave us in the dust in certain categories. And the Jews would leave us in the dust.
So let me say,
this is an empirical fact. There's nothing, there's nothing, it's what if we do. No, it's every year we do it, and every year we fall short of their measures. This is just a fact. Okay, so if UC system, I think the UC system less, but if places like Harvard and Yale and Stanford are allowing Black students or Latino students with lower scores, right? If you have to be an Asian and you have to get a perfect SAT, and somebody who's Black or Latino gets in with an SAT of, a 75 percentile, I can understand. I'm objective enough to understand that, yes, from a certain perspective, that doesn't make sense. This is affirmative action. So again, I think it's a very complicated topic, but I can at least be objective enough to see that this is the case. And we're going to talk a little bit today. If we have, I want to get to this next section, but very quickly, I'll respond to 5 things quickly that you mentioned. Sure. I was taking notes and I just want to go through this. First of all, very quickly, number 1 is when you mentioned that you were lucky and you didn't deserve to be admitted to Harvard. That is, you know what's interesting? Without even knowing your personal circumstances, I can already tell a lot of that is not true. It's bullshit. And here's why. Because apart from you and I getting into Harvard, over here, there's the game where 100 people are applying to Harvard today, 100, and of the 100, 94 are being turned down. Only 6 are getting in. 6 out of the 100. What you're asking us to believe is that since you were one of the 6, the numbers were slightly different, but when we were applying, but look, the idea is the same. It's still very, very hugely competitive to get in there. What you're asking us to believe is that those 6 people, and you being one of the 6, that somehow you were just as qualified as one of the 94 who was turned down. The whole selection process at Harvard tells you that if there are 100 people who apply and 94 get turned down, only 6 get in, gee, those 6 were awfully qualified. You were awfully qualified. Again, I don't need to know enough about your specific circumstance or how you feel. I'm telling you that statistically, the data, as you say, shows that if you're in that tiny percentage of people who are allowed in, it's a very fair assumption that you were super qualified to get there. Secondly, when we talk about Mexican Americans and the literature, there's people out there who believe, I cover politics for a living. There's all kinds of people who believe some stupid shit. Okay. I mean, believe me, I've covered Donald Trump for 4, 5, 8 years. Believe me, it's out there. There are people out there who believe that Mexican Americans only get into Harvard through affirmative action. And the only problem is they know shit about Mexican Americans and they know shit about Harvard. Other than that, they're good. Other than that, they're experts in the field and we should defer to them. Good job, Sparky. When I was 24 years old, I wrote a book about being a Mexican American kid at Harvard for a New York publisher. I'm twice the expert they are, right? Not just because I went to Harvard and you did and we're Mexican Americans, but because they don't know about either of those worlds, being Mexican or Harvard, but they want to tell me that somehow they do. Okay. Thirdly, we talked about Jews, and we can also say in the Hispanic community, you have Cuban Americans, Cubans, for instance, who look down on Mexicans generally, who think they're better, smarter, more capable than we are. I was saying this to a Mexican doctor friend of mine the other day over dinner a couple of days ago. And I mentioned that the Cubans look down on us, and his response as a Mexican doctor was, to hell with them, they wouldn't last 5 minutes in our experience. Right? Had they had to come into this country through a immigration process and not on a magic carpet through the Cuban Adjustment Act, where they become legal citizens the minute they get here, or legal status the minute they get here,
well, we're talking about an unequal thing. So at this point now, I don't really care that the Cubans look down on me as a Mexican. The fact is, I know that we didn't start off on the same place. Okay. They started off in this country because of legal status on third base, where the Mexicans had to go and work their way up. So you never have an equal playing field. You never have an apples to apples. Jews help themselves, help each other, and good for them if they do that. If we did that more as a community of people, we'd be further along. So there are those kinds of inherent differences. Fourth, I'm almost done. Fourth, when we look at like at Harvard and you think about Asians who are suing Harvard because they're being discriminated against, 25% of the student body at Harvard is Asian today. 1 in 4 people walking around at Harvard are Asian. When we were there, 25% were non-white. That included the Asians. Now, only the Asians are 25%, just by themselves. If you represent 25% of the population at Harvard, you're not being discriminated against. You don't get to come back later and say, well, I had a 1,500 on my SAT and somebody else only had 1,200 and they got in and I didn't, ergo I've been discriminated against. Horseshit. It doesn't work that way. The way it works, particularly when you go into a court of law and you argue a civil rights case, you've got to show disparate impact. You've got discriminatory impact, discriminatory intent, and disparate impact, which means what? Simple. If you have an all-white school and they don't have a single black person and one black person applies and he doesn't get in, well, we can deduce from that the reason he didn't get in because there's no black people there. Harvard's being accused of discriminating against Asian when it's a fourth Asian. That's why that case never progresses. That's why every judge, when you start looking at those cases, those rulings, they all take Harvard's side because the Asians don't have a leg to stand on. They're not being discriminated against. I can only say this: if Asians are being discriminated against, please, would somebody please discriminate against me? Please, because I need more degrees. Okay. Lastly, one last point.
Okay.
The thing about the scores, and this is, I think, the main point about the Asian example at Harvard. There's more to life than scores. I got, as I said, a 4.0 out of high school, all A's, but there are people who maybe had all B's, who worked harder, had a tougher upbringing, had different circumstances. It's really difficult to measure intelligence or capability or merit solely on scores and numbers. So those are just my thoughts as you were talking.
Okay, well, we can take that up, I suppose, in detail on another occasion. But very quickly, in response to your idea that the Asians are 25%, okay, right. I think a logical response is independent of what the law says and how the law is interpreted. I said simply on a logical, moral basis. If the real percentage, if it was based on pure merit and on scores and grades, if the true percentage should be 50%, but it's only 25%, that seems to me to be grounds for an objection. Say what we should.
Yeah, I hear that, but we can't have that. We can't have a university that, let's make it about Hispanics. We can't have a scenario where at Harvard it's 50% Mexican. We can't, even if we merited up to that point, because then you would have 50% of Harvard being Mexican and the other half would be everybody else. And when you go to Harvard, you'd say, well, it's mostly a Mexican school. And when you came away, you'd say, well, I know a lot about Mexicans now because I've been surrounded by them, but I don't know much about African Americans, Asians, Native Americans, or anybody else, right? That is not diversity. Diversity is not Mexicans take half and you guys get the rest. And so likewise with Asians, you can't have Harvard be 50% Asian, 70% Asian, 90% Asian. There can't be like, oh, there's no limit. 100% Asian? You can't, because that's not a university anymore. That's just, it's, you know, it's like when perfect example, when white people were there, when it was all white, when Harvard was all white, right? So if Harvard's all white and they say, well, those are the only ones with merit, nobody else has merit, it's all white. Well, not only is that wrong on a fundamental level, but what kind of experience are you getting as a white person at Harvard in the 40s or 50s, right? Where there's only white people. I went to Harvard, they said, and did you meet anybody who wasn't white? No, I only know white people, right? Because I went to school that was 100% white. We can't have that. So I would argue that you cannot have a 50% Asian Harvard, and this is why they kind of balance it out. But it's no small thing. You say, well, it's independent of the law. No, it's in the law. Okay, so they hire a lawyer, they file a brief, they go to court, they want to make an argument in law, in the arena of the law, and then they get to say, well, independent of the law, that's just inconvenient. Fuck that. You're in the law. You're in the courtroom. This is the rule of the game. We're playing the game by these rules because you're in the arena. If you don't want to play by the law, then just have this out on editorial pages and don't sue anybody. But the minute you hire a lawyer, pay your fee, and go into the arena of law, then we pay attention to the law.
Okay, I suppose then it gets into questions of, the ancient philosophical questions about what is justice and how to build a lasting civilization. I think those are, because your view, or what you've just described, is a vision of a society based on equal representation or equality. No, I think you can have a society based on merit.
Not 100%, because if it's however you define merit as 100%, then there was a time where the only people who had merit were all the white people, where nobody who was not white didn't have merit, because it was white people who designed what merit was. It was white people who decided in the 1930s, the 1900s, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was at Harvard as an undergraduate in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. At that point, you had to be wealthy and white, pretty much, to go to Harvard. So those are the people who had merit. If you were poor and Irish and a Catholic, like John Kennedy's family, you couldn't go. It wasn't until years later, right, that the Kennedys could go. So once upon a time, the people who defined merit were white people with money. So nobody who wasn't white and Protestant had merit. Wow, that's a coincidence. So that's the point. There's a variation of that playing out right now. I just want to say quickly, anybody listening to us right now, they see these two guys, two smart fucking Mexicans right here. Okay? Look at Razo, look at me. There's a brain in that head. Big motherfucking brain right there. And me too. Anybody who listens to this conversation and still thinks that somehow we got into Harvard because we're a Mexican, it's fucking stupid.
Well, yeah, I can agree. I can agree with you. Like I said, I've never had anybody question me or about affirmative action or question my intelligence.
I did. I wrote a book out of it, so I got the last laugh.
Yeah, I'd be receptive to anybody who wanted to to talk about intelligence or merit. Okay, Ruben, let's leave that aside for a moment, or until the next conversation, and let's get to the main topic of today's discussion, which is Larry Elder and the Black conservatives. You wrote a column recently, and you're about to publish a couple more on Larry Elder, and I think it's very interesting. Can you describe, for people who happen to not be in the loop here in California, who Larry Elder is and what the context is, and why anybody should care?
I'm going to tell you, this is really nice. It's not a complete departure at all. It dovetails nicely with what we're talking about. And that is, and here's the connection, it's people who think for themselves. So in listening to you and me talk, you may be wrong, I may be wrong, but we are brave enough to say this is what we think. And I think it would be wrong for anybody to shut you down or shut me down and say, you're not allowed to think that way. And so here comes Larry Elder. And Larry Elder is a Black conservative, and he has been a Black conservative, Black Republican. He has been a Republican his whole voting life. He says the last time he voted for a Democrat for president was 1976, when he voted for Jimmy Carter. So he has legitimately voted for every Republican for president since that time. He grew up in South Central Los Angeles. He's really smart. He went to Crenshaw High School. This was not a wealthy part of town. This is the hood. This is in South Central Los Angeles. He eventually studies hard. He goes to Brown. He's a smart guy. I'm sure at the time people said, well, you only got to go to the Ivy League because you were Black. He's a smart guy. He goes to Brown, he graduates, he goes to law school at the University of Michigan Law School. Smart guy, begins to practice law. Somewhere in the early 1990s, he decides he's going to change professions in the early 1990s. Okay, he's still a relatively young man, probably about in his very early 30s. And he decides to go back home to Los Angeles and to host a radio show. And he hosts a radio show for KABC. It's at 9 to midnight, KABC in Los Angeles. And as luck would have it, I am hired, along with Tavis Smiley, to co-host another radio show at the same time, in the same building, for the same company, on a different station. So one building, 2 studios next to each other in the hallway, and 2 different signals, 2 different radio stations. So he's at KABC, we're at KMPC, both owned by ABC Cap City. And I got to know Larry. I would see Larry at the beginning before our shows when we got to work. I would see Larry after our shows. I would see Larry in between the breaks at the water cooler, 9 to midnight. And very often when we got off the air at midnight, we would go out to have breakfast together.
How old were both of you at this time?
I was 26 when I got that show.
Oh, young kids, huh?
Yeah, that again, it's very easy to get a radio show in the #2 market in the country if you're Mexican. That's what they say. So anyway, I'm going to continue this theme over on Navarrette has a healthy self-image. So in any case,
well, I should say, Ruben, interrupt very quickly. I should say that I think a lot of the people who complain about the whole affirmative action, just by statistical probability,
yeah,
on the lower end of the IQ. So that's you're definitely right there. But I think but there's some people who are bright who do have a point. But we can take that up in later.
So in any case, back, you're right. So here to radio, at that point, to your point, I'm 26, Tavis Smiley's 29, and Larry Elder is probably about 32 at the time. So we go afterward, we'd go to an all-night, diner and have breakfast in Hollywood. And we would do what talk radio hosts do, which is talk. And we talk about the world and the country and the state and where everything was going. But he's a Republican. He was a Republican then, a Black Republican. Now, for an important point here, this was 1994, the year of Prop 187 in California, a racist anti-immigrant initiative driven by the Republicans to make California inhospitable to illegal immigrants and their children. And Larry Elder was against that initiative, as we were. So Larry Elder is a Black Republican who in 1994 is pro-immigrant.
Wow.
Pro-immigrant.
Wow. He's changed up, huh?
Very much. He's very much. So people do that, right? Some people do that. Anyway, in case. So he was pro-immigrant, and his reasons at the time, there were many reasons. It was not that hard to find Republicans who were against Prop 187 because some of them saw the writing on the wall. They said, look, if we pass this, we're going to make the whole GOP brand toxic for Latinos. We're not going to win an election for 30 years, which is exactly what happened. Which is exactly what happened. They were smart, right? So they passed it, they voted for it, they screwed themselves, and now Republicans can't get anybody elected in California and have them for 30 years. So he was of the opinion this was bad for the Republican Party. He was also of the opinion that these are hardworking Mexican immigrants, and if you don't want to compete with them, if you don't like them because you can't compete with them because you can't keep up, that's your fault. That's on you. And
what a change, huh? He's
right?
changed up
Yeah.
completely.
And he would say that, this is interesting now, he would say that to Black people who will call his show, or Black people who would confront him, who were complaining about Mexican immigrants. And he would say, too bad. Don't come and call me.
Why the change, Ruben? Why the change, Ruben? Why the change? And this is a trick.
I have an answer. I have an answer.
A setup question, which goes back to my original point about our fundamental predicament as a species is the kind of people who go into power or politics.
Go into politics, exactly. And it's a corruptive influence, but it's also a dumbing influence. It makes you stupid. There are a lot of politicians I know who are whip smart, okay, by any standard, except they got into politics. And now they stop thinking. And now they're not smart anymore. But they were once upon a time before they got into politics. Politics made them stupid. But having said that, here's quickly, I'll get to the current day. The show goes off the air eventually. I know Larry for a long time, and then I would go on his show and I saw him drifting further and further to the right, further to the nativist right. And I would go on his show, and I knew that I would argue about immigration sometimes. Some issue we agreed on, other issues we didn't, and immigration was one of the ones where we didn't. Fast forward to today, he is running. He was syndicated radio host, and he is running against Gavin Newsom in a crowded GOP field in the California recall. And the short story on the recall is it's a 50-50 tie right now in the polls. The vote is September 14th, and it looks like 50% of the state wants to keep Gavin Newsom and 50% wants to get rid of him. So it can go either way. And on the Republican side of it, there's two questions on the ballot, basically. The first one is, do you get rid of Gavin Newsom? That's 50-50. On the second question is, which Republican would you choose to replace him? On that list, you have Larry Elder and 20 other people, and he's the number one. Larry Elder is the front runner. So he's become the big story in California. My old friend's become the big story in California. Getting back to where we started, I said that you and I have the freedom, and we should insist upon this, to think for ourselves. We have the right to believe what we believe if we can defend it. And I don't care if it doesn't coalesce with what a white liberal or a white conservative or whatever says. They do not get to decide for you and me what we think. Well, likewise, the problem here is I would argue that there are people, a lot of white people, particularly white Democrats and white liberals in the media, who hate Larry Elder because he does dare to think for himself. He does take positions they disagree with. He doesn't back down. He doesn't seek their approval, and they hate him for it. And so that's what I've been writing about lately. I like Larry. I don't support him for governor, let's put it that way. But I don't support Gavin Newsom for governor either. You know, I think Gavin Newsom deserves to be bounced out of office, and I just wrote a piece as to why. But just because I'm pro recall doesn't mean I have to choose a Republican. The Republicans are all pretty bad. So you asked a question why Larry changed. I'll tell you why Larry changed. Because at some point in time, Larry Elder I knew 30 years ago and have since remained friends with. He's still my friend. Here's the thing. People don't get to choose my friends either. They don't get to tell me what to think, and they don't get to choose my friends. And if you haven't done anything personally to me, betrayed me, lied to me, you know, we're going to stay friends. And so I have friends who are far right, far left, and he's one of them. You know, he's never done anything personally to me. I don't agree with him. I'm not going to follow him off a cliff, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop being friends. I don't believe in, I used to like Navarrette. We used to be friends, but then I started reading his columns. Now I don't agree with him anymore, so we're no longer friends. That I don't agree with. So I'm not going to play that game. Where Larry Elder is now, and this is how I'll end, where Larry Elder is now is he speaks to white people. And he has, for the last 20 years on radio, certainly since I left him, and we stopped doing radio together, he has stopped talking to black people in terms of this is an important message you people need to understand about self-sufficiency and the like. And now he speaks to white people. And the white people he's speaking to oftentimes are racist, nativist, anti-immigrant Republicans in California and around the country. And he is pandering to that ugly element. And so that's the answer. The answer to the question is, if you want to know what changed between the old Larry and the new Larry, the old Larry spoke to black people. He literally told me at various times, his message back then in the early 90s was, I have a philosophy I need black people to accept. I'm here to preach to them. Don't be a victim. Don't blame everything on the white guy. You know, be self-sufficient. Don't complain about immigrants taking jobs that you don't want to do. You know, these are all the things it was tough love, right? He was talking to black people. Well, now no longer. Now he talks to white people. And unfortunately, they've taken him down a really ugly road.
Well, do you think there's any validity to his message, independent of who he's talking to? Do you think there's any validity to it?
Yes, 100%. That's the irony, right? If you listen to him speak for long periods of time, and I would recommend an interview that he gave with, in fact, Small World, my old radio host colleague, Tavis Smiley. My co-host, Tavis Smiley, who's another friend of mine. I mean, Tavis Smiley is black and on the left, and he's a friend of mine. Larry Elder is black and on the right, and he's a friend of mine. It's very difficult to keep these guys in your universe together, but I'm friends with both of them. They did an interview together where Tavis has a radio show now. on a black network, the station that he owns, in fact. And he brought Larry Elder on as a guest for the full hour. And to listen to that, Luis, it blew my mind. Not just because I knew these guys, both of them, but because they were both making good points. they were both making good points, okay? It's what I said. I'm Ruben in the center. There are times the Democratic Party makes a lot of sense, and there's a time the Republican parties make a lot of sense. There's also times that both parties are full of shit. It's the way it is. And so in this regard, when I listened to Tavis, I was saying, right on, brother, you got it right. And then Larry Elder would say something, right on, brother, you got it right. Because, you know, what can I say? They both were making a lot of sense. And so I do agree with a lot of Larry's message. Don't be a victim. Stop blaming other people. It's not the white man didn't do this to you. Lay off the immigrants for doing jobs that you don't want to do in the first place. Get up earlier, work harder, dedicate yourself to school. These are all things that are good lessons. You know, don't have children out of wedlock. And I'm saying this to African Americans and to Latinos. I'm saying this to mainly all people of color, that we're in trouble, but we're not always just in trouble because of the white man. Latinos are in trouble because of Latinos, oftentimes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Good point to make. That
Which means I can't run for governor. The very fact I just said I can't run now, because if I ever ran for governor, the white liberals would say, Navarrette, a coconut, you know, yes, a cabron, you know. And so why? Because he's white on the inside, he's brown on the outside. Why? Because Navarrette dared say what I just said. Which, what did I just say? A lot of what is failing Latinos is not because of the white man. Latinos are hurting Latinos. Oh, that's it. He's disqualified. Navarrette can't run for shit now. Because
that's from the liberal end, you mean? From the liberal,
because the white man won't allow it. Because the white liberal won't allow it. And where I get into a lot of trouble, and it's good trouble, is I will go after white liberals as hard as I go after white conservatives. And the problem is that when I go after Donald Trump and I write 100 columns critical of Trump, calling him a racist, nobody says boo. They're like, oh yeah, that's great. But if you write one column saying that Gavin Newsom has failed Latinos, and some of that's because of liberal racism, one column attacking a Democrat, but I do it anyway.
Sure. Well, I think Larry Elder and other conservatives, Black conservatives, raise some really good points. People like Candace Owens, Glenn Lowry, Thomas Sowell, and others. They make some really good points. You know, this message of, you know, work hard, be disciplined, and you can succeed. Don't be a victim. These are all very positive things. My one objection, I think it's an important one, that I can't get a Black conservative to talk to me about, is the fact that it's self-serving of very talented, very gifted Black people to tell others to work hard, you can make it, because they're very talented. But the fact is that not everybody is talented. The fact is that the average person is just average. And this message of go out and make it, you can do it, if you just try hard enough, you can make it, very positive message. But there's a real side to that message. And the real side is, no, not everybody can succeed, no matter how hard they try. And the fact is that there's tens of millions of Americans of all races who try very, very hard, who work long hours, who suffer a lot, and don't get a small percentage of what somebody who is talented, like Larry Elder, like yourself, like myself, the things that we get out of the system by working the system. And I think this is bullshit. This is bullshit. This is why you have people in South Africa, the first chance they get, they burn shit, because it's like, it's their way of saying, they don't even understand the reasons, but it's their way of saying, you know what, F you and your system, this is how I feel about it. Yeah. And then you have people like Larry Elder, like Thomas Sowell, and they're basically shitting on their own people, saying, no, you can work, you can do it, you can make it, work hard enough if you just do it. This is just not true. It's not the case. Not everybody can make it. Not everybody can succeed.
I think your point about people who have talent, being careful not to lecture those who you would say don't have as much talent. That's a good point. It's a thoughtful criticism. It's an important critique. The way I would come at it is just looking at Latinos and Mexicans. That's my community, so that's where I feel most comfortable. And I would say this. I would say that if I go back and I speak to a high school or junior high school in my hometown, mostly Mexican kids, and I say, you too can go to Harvard. If you work hard enough, you might say that 12-year-old or 13-year-old, that is a lie that I'm telling that kid may not have the talent to get to Harvard. That may be the case. But it may also be the case that if I get to that kid early enough at 10, 11, 12, I can get them to Harvard. Why? Because the choices they're going to make all through their adolescence for the next 6 years until they're 18 and they get ready to apply to college, they're going to stay out of trouble. They're going to go with the right friends. They're going to do their homework and listen to their teacher. They're going to improve themselves dramatically by making proper choices. And then, they're going to be ready to go. So I can't guarantee them that, but I can guarantee that they're going to have a much better shot at it, because going back to what we said earlier, our destiny is very much in our own hands as human beings. We have much more control over that. I do not believe that 12-year-old kid growing up, because he's a Chicanito in a little Mexican town like the one I grew up in, is somehow not going to go to Harvard. I am not the son of a Kennedy. I am not the son of a Rockefeller. I am not the son of a senator. My dad was a cop. My grandparents were farm workers. And yeah, I have this big fucking brain. Okay, I get it. But
yeah, exactly. Ruben, what did you do for your intelligence?
Well, there's a couple of answers. One is I listened to my parents. I had good parents. I listened to my teachers. I had good teachers.
Wait. That's what you did in response because of your intelligence. What did you do to
hone it?
To get your intelligence in the first place? In other words, your mental capacity, where did it come from?
Not from me. It came from a couple places. It came, first of all, I think, from God at the very beginning. I think it comes from my environment in which I was raised, that I was raised in a middle-class family. We were not wealthy, but we were not terrible. We were not poor either. We were lower middle. And I think I lucked out. I hit the lottery when I had my parents. And I think this is true of a lot of people. My parents graduated. One graduated at the bottom of his high school class, my dad, and my mom was in the middle. And they went to the same high school I did. And so they really understood the importance of education because they were always used to being the ones at the bottom. So I think they raised me to take education seriously. So those were the benefits at the beginning. Now, when I start actually, studying and getting into it, and I'm curious by nature, and I'm getting good grades and all this other stuff. Okay, well, yeah, I take off from there, and my teachers are a big help, and my school's a big help, and everything else. But the point of this conversation is that I understand that to go back, there's some presumption on my part to say, you too, little Mexican kid, can go to Harvard. But I do believe, from the life I've lived and all that I've seen, that kid has much more power over his destiny than a lot of people think, and sometimes he would think. He needs to make the right choices every single time for the next 6 or 7 years, and he will have a better shot at it. So I understand your point.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. There's a person making right choices is definitely going to be better off than a person making wrong choices. But I think we just need to balance this perspective with the reality that there's literally one half of the United States, that's 175 million people or more, have an IQ of 100 or less. So this is the reality. So to tell these people that you just work hard enough, don't worry, you can make it. It's a lie. It's a self-serving lie, because it's for a person with an 80 IQ or a 75 IQ, it's not a matter of working hard and making it. It's just I understand
your point. I really do. And I think there's some truth in it. I don't think that I like what's behind door number 2. If I'm not telling that Chicanito that message, then I'm giving them a different message. And the message goes like this: look, kid, you're screwed. You are screwed because you're 12 years old. Sure, your life's just begun, but it might as well be over, because you were born this little brown kid in this mostly brown town. And it's too bad you weren't born a white kid in Hyannisport, because then you could go to Harvard. And so you better just stay where you are. And I don't want to do that. So I agree. I agree with you there. I don't like door number 2.
I agree with you there, but that's not the only door. There's a door number 3.
Show me.
But
tell me.
we'll have to save it for another day, Ruben. We've been
Okay.
on for more than an hour. I appreciate your time sincerely. Hopefully we'll come back and keep talking. There's so many things, and you write.
It's always my pleasure.
Interesting things. Where can people find you, Ruben?
Well, first of all, it's always my pleasure, my friend, to be with you. They can find me, at my website at rubennavarrette.com. They can Google my name, Ruben Navarrette, with Navarrette, and they'll see my columns that run in about 100 newspapers around the country. Just Google it, you'll see it. And also they can listen to my podcast.
An active Facebook following as well, right?
And they can follow me on Facebook and Twitter and those places. They can also, lastly, listen to my podcast called Ruben in the Center, which they can find at Spotify, iTunes, and all podcasts.
That's right. Tell us very quickly about your podcasting projects.
Yeah, so I am really interested right now in different ways of storytelling, because I've been writing for so long, for 30 years. I'm looking at new ways. It's important not to get bored. It's important not to get stale. And I think that for me, one of the ways I'm trying to keep it lively is by changing mediums. So I still write, but I'm also, in addition to the writing, I'm also looking for ways to communicate in audio form, and that's through podcasts. So I have a podcast called Ruben in the Center. We've done 60 episodes so far, and it basically has guests about various issues that are in the news, and we talk about various things. The thing that's interesting about this podcast, it's only 20 minutes long. It's only 20 minutes long, every single episode. The interview is only 15 minutes long. It's I bring a guest on, I ask 5 questions. And one thing I've heard over and over again is people really appreciate that shorter format. So that's what it's called. It's called Ruben in the Center, because that's where I am, in the center. And I'm not a partisan. I don't like the Republicans. I don't like the Democrats. And I insist on my right and yours to think for ourselves.
Excellent, Ruben. Well, listen, I'm looking forward to your future columns on Larry Elder and see what happens with this. I also look forward to talking again on the next opportunity that we get.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good one, Ruben. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.